Welcome back to the Now Morning Show right here on TTT, everybody. Now I'm going to have a conversation with Senator the Honorable Paula Gopee-Scoon, who is the Minister of Trade and Industry, and we're just going to ventilate some of the 10 key points that were outlined in the interview that the Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley, had recently. And good morning, Minister.
Good morning to you, and good morning to the population that's looking on.
And thank you for being here this morning to really, ventilate and elaborate a little bit on some of the key points that were touched in the interview of the Prime Minister.
Good.
Now, to start, we will speak chronologically. First would be the decision on the patriotic bid that was granted toward the OWTU, and how that decision was made, and how are the benefits that we see would come out of it.
Thank you. So the most difficult decision was, in fact, to restructure Petrotrin, and the closure of the refinery came, and the setting up of other organizations, including Heritage and Paria. Heritage to focus on oil exploration and production, and that is going well. We are actually earning revenues from that, and also Paria to ensure that there was actually no gap in terms of the supply of fuels to the national community. Right. So that has worked well. The decision to involve patriotic. Well, let me say that this is a bid was done by a very transparent bid process that went out to the world at large, and there were a number of companies that had been involved in the bid process, and there had been a committee to review the process. And then they would have come to Cabinet with the final recommendations. As it is, we are still in negotiations, the final negotiations with Patriotic. And of course, we trust that this can come to an end pretty soon, and so that government can quickly take a decision to progress with Patriotic. And I think this is going to be in the national interest, and in particular, the interests of the people of the southern region of Trinidad.
Definitely, because as we know, it would have had far-reaching effects to many people and their families, and to know that things are progressing, and this could come to a positive close. It's great news moving forward.
Right, and that's not to say that people were not compensated.
Of course.
Because there was probably about $2.7 billion, I could be corrected, but certainly more than $2 billion went into circulation at the time of the closure.
In severances and such.
That's right. But we anxiously await the finalization of this process to ensure that a number of persons can be re-employed, and so that there's going to be, we foresee substantial activity back in the Southland.
Yes, of course. And of course, there would be great economic reaches as well for the country as a whole, once these things are back in place and in operation.
But just to say again and to re-emphasize that there has been substantial drilling activity and exploration activity with regard to Heritage, and we have already seen the benefits of that in terms of the results. I think when we looked at the last results, I think there was a profit of about $750 million, so
wow.
that the progress is there.
Yeah, so it's great to see already, even
a difficult decision, very difficult decision, but one to which we're already seeing results.
And that is the great news about it, and definitely one that the public should take away, that we're already seeing progress with it. The next question, Minister, would be on the decision not to devalue the Trinidad and Tobago dollar against foreign exchange.
But again, another difficult decision. And largely, the government had to look at all factors. And generally, what won out would be the effect on the overall population and the inflationary aspect of it as well. Surprisingly, it does have effect on most businesses, as we are an important country, and therefore anybody who imports will be affected by a devaluation, and the inflationary side of it is going to be substantial. There are those who would have benefited, and those would be the holders of substantial amounts of foreign currency.
Right.
And therefore you have what we faced as a government was, do we do this in the interest of a few, or do we act in the interest of all? And by and large, I think that that most businesses are comfortable with the decision that we have taken, and of course it benefits the public as well in terms of inflation and the control of food prices, it's in particular. So that it's a difficult decision, but one which we had to take, and I think generally it has benefited the public. There is absolutely no way that this government is going to devalue at this time.
Minister Gopee-Scoon, as we are speaking about, well, the dollar, I want to add a little bit or interject a little bit, simply because one of the discussion points would have been talks on the decriminalization of marijuana. And I know particularly that rang bells with just about everyone.
Yes.
But to most could be a step towards what could be the monetization of the industry, perhaps. Decriminalization, that is, perhaps being a first step towards an industry which could potentially be very much a big contributor to our economy. And as we're talking about the dollar and growth therein, I'm wondering if at all that's what this is the first step of. Could you confirm or perhaps clarify whether or not we'll see that in the near future, the marijuana industry at least?
That's right, and we've seen it in other countries as well. Certainly in Jamaica, there's a lot of activity. In Canada, tremendous activity on the commercial side. What we took was the first step, which is the amendment to the Dangerous Drugs Act. And what that allows is for the decriminalization of marijuana up to certain amounts, 30 grams of marijuana. And that's a very, very important decision in terms of the freeing up of the system, of the court system. Because there are a number of persons who had been languishing in our courts and in our jails on simple marijuana charges. So that frees up the court system as well. So, but that first piece of legislation simply dealt with the decriminalization and the amounts that are allowed. And also it dealt with the penalties, the fact that marijuana cannot be smoked in public places and so on. There is another piece of legislation which will be harmonized with the first amendment, and that is the Cannabis Control Act. And that's where we will deal with other matters in terms of the regulatory aspects, the commercial aspects, and so on. And that has gone to the Parliamentary Joint Select Committee. And of course, we get going on those discussions pretty soon. I am a member of it. I have an active interest from the commercial side. And there are a number of persons who have come forward indicating an interest in the industry. And therefore, from the business side of it, I certainly will be looking at it from that angle.
Yeah, I think also once the time comes to open the industry and put legislation in place to allow cannabis industry, more than recreational use and such, I think there's a lot in regards to what the male plant, the hemp plant, can be used towards, such as textiles, foodstuff, as well as construction materials, fertilizers. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, but I think what we're looking at, what persons are looking at the values in terms of medicinal usage more than ever. And of course, we draw on the successes of that in several other countries. But it's a very ticklish matter because quality becomes an issue. And with the strains, the particular strains that are being used in the manufacturing of this marijuana for medical use. So there are several issues that have to be, that must be looked at, and I suppose these will all form part of the discussions. But quality becomes an issue when you're talking about the commercial aspect of it, particularly for medical use.
You know, foreign exchange has been something that has been a challenge for, well, everyone really, anyone who is seeking foreign exchange, but more so for those who are in manufacturing and would have a need to access foreign exchange, large amounts of foreign exchange to conduct their business. You know, especially for the fact that they would get some of their products imported and such. So when it comes to foreign exchange and the increase of foreign exchange made available to manufacturers, how will that affect us on the whole, and how does it affect the manufacturers directly?
Right, so let's agree that we are a trading nation, so there's substantial exports and imports, but particularly imports still coming into our country. Yes, we're doing well in manufacturing, but it's only in particular sectors. Yes, the petrochemical sector, food and beverage, etc., etc. So that you still need considerable goods for imports. The imports of drugs. We don't manufacture very little. And so the imports of drugs, imports of raw materials for manufacturers. And there has been what is termed a foreign exchange crunch. And let's admit that. And the government has been very clear about its position of not devaluing the currency. naturally we're concerned that the manufacturers in particular are able to import their raw material requirements. And so what we've been doing, well, apart from sourcing their foreign exchange requirements from their bankers, which is where you would have established a relationship, and so it is for importers, for obtaining foreign exchange, the government has been very clear on increasing its foreign exchange to the Exim Bank, and there it is. We have created a facility, in particular, which would benefit the small and medium-sized manufacturers to obtaining foreign exchange and for their raw material imports. That system has worked very well, and recently Cabinet took a decision to top up the foreign exchange availability to the Exim Bank. So I think by and large, we manufacturers have been accessing both from the commercial bank and from the Exim Bank. But we would admit that there is to some extent a black market, and the hope is that this is minimized, and that it's going to be available from the sources that I've just said. I mean, what we really want to look at too is to ensure that we continue to manufacture the things that we consume,
right.
And so that there's going to be a strong focus on working with the manufacturers, and you're going to be hearing more of that as we go along, and we have our exchanges with the TTMA and the wider stakeholders on making it attractive to manufacture in Trinidad and Tobago. We've seen the increases. The manufacturing sector has grown by, in the first quarter of 2019, I think by 4.9%. It has had its challenges, but what is more important is that our exports have grown substantially. But the idea is to grow that manufacturing sector. Is one of those we talk about. It's one of those sectors that we are targeting. We always talk about the other sectors which we want to develop, and that is certainly one that has worked well. There are so many people employed in the sector. 65,000, about 60,000 persons.
Wow.
It is an area of focus
for
the government, and we would continue to work with the private sector to encourage them to invest in the sector. It's a sector that definitely can grow, and certainly the supply of foreign exchange, we are making every attempt to make sure that it's available to them.
To definitely help buttress the
and
activity.
we want to encourage our consumers to buy local as well.
Yeah.
To look at the choices. More and more, your choice is not just a local product as against a foreign product, but what you're finding now is, because of the availability of a range of products in the market, you have a choice between several local products,
that's right.
which are of international quality,
and sometimes superior,
and sometimes superior, fresher, etc.
That's right.
And so the encouragement is always to buy local, and I think the prices will dictate that you are encouraged to buy local. I'm advocate for that. It's the healthier way, and not only buy locally manufactured goods, but buy locally produced goods as well at our farmers' markets, etc. It's saving foreign exchange. We are consuming, and we are becoming more healthy individuals.
Right. And it's more sustainable as well.
No.
That's right, more sustainable.
Staying on the vein of spending, I was just because we have had the direct questions asked to us, with the change of the demonetization being a success of the
I'm
dollar.
glad you
that
said
is
it's a success.
a success, that is.
Yes.
I'm wondering, just as a layman, what is the next phase? Because then does that mean that we're going to see all of the notes changing? We're going to see new things coming in the first quarter, perhaps in the latter part of the year? What is the next phase to continue
I can only
this
say
success?
perhaps, but there's nothing that I could reveal on further steps to the demonetization. This has been a great success, and to all of the stakeholders and persons involved in it, the central bank, and even the understanding, and certainly the Bankers Association, all of the members of staff of the banks who really worked well over Christmas and so on to make sure this was a success. We join with you. This has been really very good. We've achieved the objectives, and certainly on the criminal side, we've seen the particular instances come up. And so, what's next? Let's leave that for further discussion, and I'll speak to it when there's concrete suggestions of where we're going.
Fair enough.
Again, we understand that there may not be too much you could reveal because again, it's a national security issue as well.
It is.
And as you mentioned earlier, that you mentioned the phrase the black market, and well, as Anka said, the demonetization was a success. But what were the rubrics by which they can measure it as a success, though?
Certainly, in terms of the swiftness to which it happened, it moved according to plan. Everything fell in place in terms of the interrelations between government, banks, and the public at large. And so that was a success. And then certainly on the national security side, and I couldn't give you the exact figures, but certainly it's out there in the public domain, some of the instances that were brought to the fore publicly. And certainly this has been a success on the national security side, and that was one of the major objectives.
Yeah. That has been achieved.
That has been achieved, yes.
Well, Honorable Minister Paula Gopee-Scoon, Minister of Trade and Industry, I want to thank you for joining us this morning, ventilating these topics and key points that that the public, I'm sure, have been wrapping their heads around since the interview with the Prime Minister. Again, anyone who wants to just go through this information again, you could look back at our Facebook feed because this will be online as well. Thank you, Minister, for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to jump across to you, Anka.